Hello, this is Beastly Eel with another Eel Talk. And on this episode, we're going to be talking about the very first episode of Loki, a series on Disney Plus. Now, I talked a little bit, obviously, on my last video, um, 2 videos ago, about this show being about Loki and what happens during Endgame. So, what we find out is the episode begins with Endgame, specifically the part where Tony Stark and Captain America and Ant-Man are trying to steal the Tesseract. Now, during this scene, we know in the actual movie, Loki escapes. And we see this again. But we never know what happens after. Well, now we do. So apparently he went to Shanghai or some east, sorry, Western world and Western country. And he lands there and he's pretty much free. And he's telling the civilians there that he is the god of mischief. He must be bowed to, blah, 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 blah. Typical Loki stuff. So then this portal opens up and these people come in, fully armed, okay? And armed with nothing we've ever seen before. They look just like batons. And Loki's not scared at all. They grab the Tesseract and he's not happy. So she hits him with the nightstick, and apparently it slows him down time wise. And she puts this collar on him and then brings him in. So she brings him in, and they take the Tesseract along with it, and they go to the Time Variance Authority. Okay? And it is a massive, well, right at this point, all we see is a building. Inside, anyway. And she tells this guy to put this in evidence, and Loki's trying to fight. But every time he tries to do something, she clicks a button, and he goes back in time, body wise. And she explains to him that he's stuck in a time loop and he won't be able to do anything. So he gets, I don't want to say torn apart because that's not true. It's more of he gets disrobed, his clothes are eliminated, and he gets put into prison guard, prison uniform. And he has to take a number for his court date. Now, while he's waiting for the court date, he sees this video, and it talks about the time variance and what they do, time variance authority, and what they do. So they explain, without specifically explaining it to Loki himself, it explains it to the audience, that he is in time prison. Which is so funny to me because what it is they talk about the sacred timeline, which is apparently these three timekeepers um, make sure and dictate that nothing gets too branched off. Because apparently, at some point in time, or time has already happened, it's already happened or it's going to happen, because we're not quite sure, that all these things start to branch off and it causes a multiverse war. And that's why they create the timeline. So what they do is this group, the Time Watchers, created the TVA to then take out all variances that aren't part of the sacred timeline. So anybody who's been teleported in is part of a variance. That is a branch off of the timeline for whatever reason. Whether it was because you're late for work, which I thought was a weird one, or doing something completely different that wasn't part of the timeline. And that's why Loki's there. He did something that wasn't part of the original timeline. So Loki gets put into court. Now, while he's kind of getting scanned in, I'm looking at my notes. We find out that he has a thermal aura, and we don't know what that is about yet, but it's some sort of scam. So they specifically state that if he was a robot, he'd be melted from the inside out. Which begs the question that there might have been robots that were put in, which makes me think of Ultron. I'll get to that later. That being said, what gets me is the fact that Loki is in prison for being sentenced, and he now knows that there's a sacred timeline. And now, granted, Loki doesn't believe it, but it's happened, meaning like it's around. So while this is going on, we see Owen Wilson's character, who is a I'm going to use the word detective loosely here, because he's not in the regular uniform. I imagine he's a higher ranking. He hunts down variants. Apparently, he's been investigating a very specific variance, um, and a variance dictates a creature that has caused the timeline to change. Even though they call the whole branch of variance as well, specifically they're talking about when they're hunting a variance, it's a specific creature. Just so you're aware, because that kind of threw me off a little bit. I had to really think about when they were talking. So he finds out that whatever variance was there took out all of the men without a problem and destroyed the time destroyer. What it does is it basically breaks apart the timeline before it breaches out too far. So this continues, and we see that they were all taken out. So as he is talking to these people, uh, they see a kid, and they talk to this kid to figure out who did it. And the kid points to a stainless glass picture of the devil. My mind automatically went to Mephisto, but needless to say, we have no idea who it is. Um, so they destroy the timeline, and they mention that it's getting past the red line. So apparently, on the continuum, there's like the main sacred timeline, and then there's like a line above and below, which is red. And I'm assuming, because I don't know for a fact, it has not been specifically stated, it is not able to be destroyed if it goes too far, um, or consequences could happen. I'm not quite sure on that front. But something happens when it gets past the red lines, and we personally have not seen that yet. Anyway, continuing the story. So, somebody gets turned in, or somebody comes in through a portal and gives a file to Owen Wilson, specifically on Loki, the Loki from 2012. I know it's time travel, it's time manipulation. There's a lot of stuff going on. So anyway, he goes in and he sits in the courtroom as Loki's basically pleading his case that he's done nothing wrong and that the Avengers are the ones who manipulated time and that they're the problem and he will gladly get rid of them for the TVA. And the judge basically says, no, the Avengers were supposed to do that. What you did was not supposed to happen in the timeline. And he's like, who decides this? And they're like, the timekeepers. And he's like, they don't know anything, blah, 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 blah. So he's going to be sentenced to be vaporized. What that means is he gets wiped from existence. Because he's not part of the sacred timeline, he would no longer exist. That particular version of Loki. Loki would still exist in the continuum until the point in which he dies. Because that's what the sacred timeline has happened. So anyway, as it continues, Olmoston stops this from happening. I don't even remember his name. It's awful, isn't it? So he brings Loki to his office. Loki tries to manipulate him, doesn't work because he knows all of Loki's past and present and future, beginning to end. He knows it all. He studied Loki. So, anyway, This continues, and he shows Loki his past up to his present, to kind of show him, to kind of really understand Loki better. But not just understanding Loki better, to try to get him, Loki, to understand Loki. And I think that's a huge twist. I guess is the best way. So Loki's really not convinced. We also know that he's got a hidden reason why he wants to do what he does, but he doesn't specifically state it. So he then, um, the whole thing gets interrupted, um, and they leave. So what I mean by they, I mean Owen Wilson's character and the rest of the TVA leave the room. Now, during this whole sequence, Loki had stolen his time manipulation thing, that is around his neck, and so he escapes. So while trying to escape, he finds the guy who took his tesseract, and he threatens to turn him into a fish, and the guy doesn't know what a fish is, so he basically threatens to kill him. So when opening up the tray, he gets the tesseract, but looking inside, he sees all the Infinity Stones and multiple versions of the Infinity Stones. And it is mentioned during this conversation with the guy that, oh yeah, people come in with these things all the time. All the time. So, that being said, it continues. So they try to chase him around, doesn't work. Loki gets brought back, brings himself back to Owen Wilson's office, and watches the rest of the tape. Watching his mother die, watching um, Hela destroy um, Asgard pretty much, and then him teaming up with Thor, and then him dying from Thanos. And the reason why we know for a fact he died was because the role in which his timeline existed ended. We see it on there. End of film. End of everything. So he dies. The questions of everybody talking about whether Loki actually died in Endgame, he did. Proven right now, 100%. Boom. So this continues. Owen Wilson comes back. They start talking. Um, he also attacks the woman who was kind of the guard of him, and he basically continues to manipulate the time because he puts it on her, and she gets stuck in a loop. Owen Wilson comes back, and Loki really wants to understand why Owen Wilson's character wants him. And Loki finally admits that the only reason why he does what he does was because he wanted power, he wanted to be respected, and he wanted everything to be correct. He kind of wanted the world to be right in his own weird way. He doesn't like hurting people. We found that out, apparently. Um, and so he really wanted to know why. So Wilson tells him he's looking for a variance. And so Loki's like, well, what do you think? You want the god of mischief to be the one to stop them? And he's like, yeah. So he's like, who's the variance? You. Mind blown. Mind blown. So the end of the episode comes where we see another variance, meaning another timeline happening, and the guards try to stop it from happening, and they get trapped. Now, the way they get trapped is kind of, I'll talk about that later, but it's very Loki like, in my opinion. It's used oil, and it lights a fire around them and kills them that way. We see a hooded figure. We never see the person's face. We assume it's Loki because Owen Wilson's character said it was Loki. We don't know that for a fact. And that's the end of the episode. A lot to unpack here. Big thing. There is one timeline. There's supposed to be one timeline. There should be no more multiverses. Which means at some point, whether it's already happened, which I doubt, or we're going to be leading into the multiverse war, there is going to be a multiverse war where multiple multiverse, multiple universes will be fighting each other for dominance, and that's when the timekeepers kind of come in, fix the timeline, and make sure it stays between the two red lines. Apparently, the Infinity Stones have been used a lot as variances, which is interesting. Um, we don't know who, no idea who. Could be a plethora of people. Um, I do think Loki is the main bad person, but I don't think it's male Loki. I'm gonna I'm going to predict that they're gonna use a female Loki because it's a variance. It's not part of the regular timeline, so therefore could potentially be a female Loki, which causes the variance and causes everybody to lose their mind, aka try to stop that Loki, try to stop that variance. What we also found out was what the Avengers did was supposed to happen, meaning them going back in time was what was supposed to happen, which was what was the reason why we thought that was a problem was because we thought it was going to lead to multiverse, which it still could, but it was possibly meant to happen. Um, we will see later, obviously. So yeah, um, even though I thought it was Mephisto in the beginning, obviously, um, it's obviously Loki. I think it's a female Loki because the comic books have kind of had Loki change gender, age multiple times. So it wouldn't be all that unheard of to have a variance as a female Loki. And I don't think it would ruin the story at all because it's not supposed to happen. So it just makes sense to be a completely different gender too. Um, and it's going to be much more of a crime drama than I was expecting. Um, so yeah, definitely very interested in this. This is a much better show than I was anticipating so far. Granted, it is only episode one, but still, looks great, sounds great. The story looks sounds amazing right now. Cannot wait to see what happens in episode two. Just like always, please watch the episode on Disney Plus. But also, if you like the content you see, please like and subscribe below so I can continue making content like this. But for now, this is BCEO signing out. And have a wonderful night.